It is my privilege to introduce to you a visionary in global higher education, Hector H. Lopez.
2, 3, ho!
We're going to be trying to be transparent, trying to be authentic, trying to be plain spoken about where we are right now. Because seldom do we have an opportunity to gather globally like this. Maybe once, maybe twice a year. And I've always had this feeling when I've been inside of an institution that we have an idea or a perception of ourselves as somehow gatekeepers. But I think it's much more than that. And I actually believe that we're change agents and that we're architects. And that's what we're going to drive today. So to get there, we're going to begin just like I begin when I visit any school. And when I visit any school, I usually ask, first number that pops into your head, please, from the audience. How many years do you think you get to live? First number that pops into your head, 80 years, approximately. I'm going to make it a little bit more difficult. How many days do you think you get to live? First number that pops into your head.
80 times 3.
No. First number that pops into your head. 25,000. Yeah, you're doing the math, mister. First number that pops in your head. 60,000. Over here, gentlemen. 42,000 days. You know the number one answer I usually get when I go to many of your schools, particularly high schools? 1,000,000 days. Remember when we used to think like that? Remember when we used to think that we were invincible? Somehow, some way, we were going to live forever. It's in the tune of our music. I know many of you have been traveling through Latin America right now, and you sense that vibe, that community vibe that you see in Bogotá, that you see in Panama, in Mexico. And the thing is that that's where most of our greatest ideas lie. That is what kind of vibe we need to maintain. Because if you're trying to do the math in your head, the average lifespan of a human being is approximately 28,000 days. 28,000 days, go ahead and slash off 10K right now. Quítenle 10,000 días, because that's how much you'll sleep. And while we would all love to work while we're sleeping somehow, you can't. While we would all like to experience life somehow while you're sleeping, you can dream, but it's not the same as experiencing life. And so, you've got 18K. And then it just depends on how old you are. But the average in this room will find that you are under 10,000 days left for an average lifespan of 76 years. Are you making every day count? What will our legacy be? And this is a conversation I have with students at schools all the time. All the time. Any opportunity I get, but it's the same conversation for us. It's the same conversation for us because of the tenor of the times that we're living in. So, let's get into that. I don't think I need to say it because we all feel it. But I think we know where education stands today. Whether you're in Europe, Australia, Canada, I think we know. You know it, you feel it. Just like you felt it, that community vibe of pride, of cuisine, of music that makes you feel invincible. Just like you felt it in your travels or in your school when you're like interacting with students and they have that zest. I think you know where we stand in education right now. AI, quantum computing. I don't know if you've checked the news in like science journals as of late, but there may be a discovery over at Google called Project Willow, in case you're wondering, that may be challenging time and space. It may be telling us that we can actually compute faster than we can even think. Microsoft just made an announcement 4 days ago, Project Majorana, the discovery of a brand new state of matter that, according to Microsoft, humankind has never seen before. So it's not gas, it's not liquid, it's not solid. I don't know what it is, but they have intellectual property that they must preserve. But there's a new discovery somehow at Microsoft right now. And then, of course, we know what's going on in the United States and with the Department of Education. We all love stories. And stories somehow speak to a part of us that almost thinks with emotion. But to fully experience them, to let them guide us, we need to be willing to listen. Truly willing to listen. We must be willing to lean in. We must be willing to feel. At times we must be willing to also let go. Every great story has a turning point. A moment when the protagonist realizes they've been holding on to something, a belief, a system, a way of doing things, perhaps. You may equate it to sometimes how you feel at staff meetings. But sometimes these things no longer serve us. And in order to get to the next level, you need to let it go. A moment when you have to make a choice. When you have to say to not only yourself, but to your colleagues, to your industry, do we cling on to the past? Or do we do something that moves us forward? I believe that's where we are today. And I know you feel it because I feel it. I think we're in a moment of reinvention. And I genuinely believe it. I've lived a moment of reinvention in my own life. Many of you have lived a moment of reinvention in your own life. And today, higher education is living that moment of reinvention. It truly is. Like, without a doubt, we are at a crossroads. And it's a crossroads that gives you the feels, like, strongly. The question I think we have to ask ourselves is, will we be creative pioneers or something else? For the past half decade, from the pandemic through to today, we have been engulfed, flooded with raw, unfiltered emotion. Moments of rage, of loss, exhilaration, tears, confusion, and the weight of the world that is shifting beneath our feet, leaving us feeling powerless, sometimes useless, unable to build, adrift, perhaps even. And we have also witnessed the truth. Many hesitate to say it, but we're witnessing the truth that the higher education system, as we knew it, is being left for dead right now. It really is. It is being left for dead. In fact, I want to call out something that I know we all feel, and that I want to be plain spoken about, and that I hope in this conference we can throughout its duration as well. Fear. fear has engulfed us. It truly has. Fear. Fear of job loss. Fear of numbers. Fear of loss of enrollment. I know that feeling. And we're having to speak with students and speak about dreams and speak about careers and speak about life. But this is foundationally at the heart of our emotional state. It truly is. Another fear, something far worse, and it's inside of you when you're at a staff meeting and you feel you want to speak up, but you decide not to. The fear of being blamed, tarred and feathered for having the audacity to speak out plainly to what we are all witnesses to. And I get it. The value system of higher education, the liberal arts, the very principles that we once knew as pillars of knowledge, truth, science, history, are all under the duress of an existential shift. And who wouldn't be overwhelmed with all of that? It's okay. You got to feel it. You have to lean in. You can't deny it. Because no amount of fear will change the fact that the very system of higher education is being left for dead. If you had asked me at 18 what my life's mission was, I would have had a very, very simple answer for you. Getting into Georgetown University. I believe that if I could just get there, right, that would be it. It would be like the end all, the be all, the ticket, the answer. I imagine many of you are familiar. It's that certainty, that belief that a singular institution, a singular achievement in life is going to define that future. That was everything to me. Everything to me. I was a kid born and raised along the U.S.-Mexico border. El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juárez. Fluent in English and Espanol and immersed in two distinct cultures. I understood the contrast. I truly did. The different value systems, the opposing worldviews. Understood it. I lived it. One culture prioritized community, deep, genuine human connection. And the other emphasized individual triumph and personal accomplishment. I learned to navigate them both. But I fully didn't understand it, not like I do today, being a first-time father at 45. Back then, everything was raw. Everything was raw. I led with emotion. If there's one undeniable truth about America Latina, it's that no matter where we are, no matter where we stand on the planet, it's our deep-rooted belief in community. Genuine community. And we are bound by the power of our shared experiences, by the genuine human connection that somehow penetrates the soul. Emotional intelligence is not just present in our culture, it is second nature. It moves through us before logic steps in, before any filter is applied. So this story should be of no surprise. In 2003, with my freshman to Georgetown degree hanging above my municipal government desk, I began to, as my friend Robin would say, I began to crumble in a way that someone who had never, ever crumbled ever could. And in that crumbling moment, one of my nearest and dearest mentors flew in to town, to my hometown of El Paso, Texas. And over coffee, he asked me a very simple question. How's life? I was first time crumbling, angry, frustrated, disillusioned. I had stepped into government service straight out of Georgetown with that idealistic vision, believing in what public service could be. And instead, I found myself working for some shady mayor and someone that actually the city adored somehow, and whose true leadership I got to see behind the curtain. I worked tirelessly for that position. I went like 6 interviews. I was 21. So I secured this job at 21, 6 interviews, fresh out of Georgetown. I turned down offers from everyone I considered to be prestigious. The White House, the Department of Education, roles that carried, in my mind, weight and history, prestige. And all for what? To be swindled at every turn, my salary promises unfulfilled, my work a far cry from the impact I had dreamed of making. I vented all of this to Ernesto, founder of the National Hispanic Institute. He listened, he nodded. He looked at me and asked, have you ever thought about nonprofit work? Have you ever thought about working to make a real social impact? And then he said something that changed my life. We're opening up the Northeast U.S. office on the campus of Villanova University. I think you'd be great. I need you to meet someone. His name is Steve. Really sidetracked my life's course. And thank God that it did. That's why we're here today. I left everything behind. My titles, my municipal government career, my, carefully built plan that I had built when I was in high school. That brings me to a point I want to make about you. You stand at the threshold between what higher education was and what it can become. You have more power than you realize. I used to travel 24/7, 90% of my year on the road. And if there's one thing that I've learned in those travels is that nothing expands your frame of reference like movement, like seeing the world firsthand like you do, like working intimately with communities, their thought processes, their cultures, their families. If you've walked the streets of Bogotá, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, if you've listened carefully, truly listened to the pulses of these places, you know what's at the heart of our stories. You feel it. You know what's at the heart of our stories. You can certainly understand that there's a vibe. We need to tap in to that vibe. It is the key to big new ideas and great power. It's about narratives. It's about people. It's about who gets to write their own future and who gets shut out. We need conviction. The conviction to reject the outdated. The conviction to design systems that reflect the world as it is, not as it was. The conviction to be the ones who step up, who speak up, who rewrite the script of access before the system collapses underneath its own weight. And you feel it. Because if we don't speak up, the ones who are actually on the road actually with the students, actually with the families. Who will? Who will? We talk a lot in this space with students pursuing dreams, about reaching new heights. But I believe there's something even more important: differentiation. Think about the biggest dreams you've ever had. The difference between a dream that is genuine, true to yourself, worth pursuing, that you sense that it's powerful. An idea that is just superficial, fleeting, and external automatically feels different. It really does, if you're paying attention. Think about it like this. How many times were you told what kind of job you should have? Right? How many times did you hear that success meant securing a great salary? That the goal was reaching the highest paying job, the biggest title, the greatest financial reward. How many times did you think like I did right after leaving Georgetown? We were raised on these ideas. We were trained to believe them. We truly were. But there is a difference, vast, life-altering difference between chasing what others define as success and pursuing what is true to you. That lesson, I didn't learn it in school. I'm sure you didn't learn it at school either. I learned it. I learned it from my mentors. I learned it from my family. I learned it from life. Zoom forward a little bit. My biggest dream, my life's mission at 33 was that I would build the biggest financial aid system you had ever seen for Latin America. I laugh at myself because it's like, it's a crazy story now that I look back at it. In 2009, I set out to write a white paper with Steve Merritt, Dean of Enrollment Management, Villanova University. We wanted to issue a course correction in 2009 to warn higher education leaders about a storm that was coming. I was a primary author, but Steve was right there behind me, a co-author in every way that mattered. And together, we asked, what is the future of higher education? Not just in the United States, but across the world. And our biggest realization? That we were experiencing a massive demographic shift worldwide. Already, in 2009. A shift that higher education was not prepared for. A shift that we are now living. If systems weren't restructured, we would see schools start to close. And here we are. My sister's alma mater in Philadelphia, University of the Arts, closed suddenly. No one knew. They're caught in court battles today. The height of U.S. enrollment was 19 million students in 2017. We can't break 15 million today. That's in the United States. But it's not just happening there. Just yesterday, I went to Universidad Javeriana here, sitting with administrators. They tell me that the total enrollment is approximately 2 million in Colombia, dropping. And right now, they're trying to figure out, what is all this experiential learning stuff about? Population is still growing, thank you very much. It's a system problem. back in 2009, we stated it. Even though it's my own alma mater that did not listen, I don't blame them. I really don't blame them. Because at the time, higher education was riding high in the superficial stuff, right? It seemed like a golden age. Why listen to two enrollment people talking about a coming collapse? And so I had to make a decision because I couldn't ignore what I saw. And so, like a pattern that keeps repeating in my life, I left it all. I did what I always seem to do. It's like a municipal government. I don't know how many times I've replayed this conversation in my mind. 2011, the year I left it all again. Sat down with Steve, and I told him plainly I was leaving, walking away from everything. A stable salary, the nice travel, the hotels. We all know about that at the university side of things. And at the time, I was also serving as a senior vice president of the National Hispanic Institute. And let me tell you, making that leap was tough. It was tough. But that conversation with Steve was epic. At the time, I don't think I fully understood, but I think he understood. He did. Sadly, 3 years later after that conversation with Steve, we lost him at age 59. When I left Villanova, believing that my mission was clear, to build the system that would mirror what already existed, to replicate the financial aid structure of the United States of America and bring it to Latin America like a gift of some sort. I thought I was creating something new, honestly, truthfully. I thought it was being revolutionary. But in reality, I was only replicating. I wanted to be that change agent, but I was still operating in the same old framework that we're still operating today, 22 years later. I wanted to disrupt the system, but I was still seeing the world through the prism of my own US experience, and that was my mistake. At 18, my entire life's mission had been getting into Georgetown. At 33, my entire life's mission became building a financial aid system for Latin America. But here's the hard truth. I was wrong. I was wrong. We have to be able to be comfortable saying in our offices, in our staff meetings, not only I was wrong, but we are wrong. We were wrong. And it's okay if that is not what we need, because that wasn't what we needed. It's clear to me today. But everything in my training, everything in my first class education told me that it was. The system that had helped millions in the United States, why else wouldn't it work elsewhere? I was trying to solve a systemic problem with a system-dependent solution. I'll say it again. I was trying to solve a systemic problem with a system-dependent solution. I was trying to break free while at the same time being bound and shackled by the most expensive education system known to the world. That's how deep this runs. Don't get me wrong. I'm a product of affirmative action. I know it. I'm a product of financial aid. Without it, without scholarships, I wouldn't be standing here. I recognize all of that. I honor all of that. I also recognize this. How much of those models are already outdated? How much of it was built upon an old imperial system. How much of it is simply not where the future is headed? And be honest. When I look back at my notes leaving Villanova, I carried a little notebook. I must secure the funds necessary to unlock millions of fellow Latinos throughout the world, to give them access to the rigor, the challenge, and the social capital that elite institutions like Georgetown and Villanova provide. Directly from my notes. I believed it. I believed it to my core. And at the time, higher education and enrollment, they were hovering at about 16 million back then. Mind you, today we're below 15. Maybe back then we were also edging towards 17 million, which we ended up hitting 19 million. So it's not that long ago. I was convinced that the answer was very simple, that we needed to figure out a way to pay for it. Tan tan se acabó. That's what we say in Mexico, no? That was the battle I chose to take on, the funding, because in my mind, it was the key to opening the gates. That was the key. But looking back, I see it now, I was wrong. I was wrong. The model I believed in, it wasn't what we needed. It wasn't the answer. But it was the runway, the path that leads us here today. Because today, higher education isn't what we thought it was. It's collapsing underneath its own weight. I know many of you here today are still fighting for solutions. Many of you are the ones being sent to recruit international students, trying to figure out how to get them to pay full freight. Colleges and universities. That's what my mission was. I was always speaking up about it. I know you have ideas. I know it. You have thoughts of how this could work differently. And yet, most of us, we stay quiet, we hold back, we don't put our ideas on the table because we fear they won't align with what higher education believes about itself. But that is exactly what we need to change. You need to go back home. Talk about this. You need to talk about new models. You need to talk about different ideas. Not to mess with the numbers, to work on the fringes. Ideas that could reshape the future of higher education, of education K through 12. Because make no mistake, we are living through the biggest existential shift in, I'll just say, the modern history of our planet. For years, I've had the privilege of being part of a global discussion, global conversations on education and educational policy. I was there at the G20 when it was first hosted in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And let me tell you, everyone is looking for answers. And there's not that many. Very few people actually have them. That's why I'm looking at you. That's why I'm looking at us. This is where I may get nostalgic. Let me tell you a story, or the story rather, in my view, of Michael Gaynor, Director of Admission at Villanova University. To speak of Michael is to speak of stories. Stories spun with a masterful blend of suspense, humility, and humor. He was like a weaver of connections. Each thread a life he touched, each knot a bond he forged. I remember the first time we met at a luncheon, a very well-known eatery in Villanova, Pennsylvania. And there, surrounded by the formalities of professional introduction, Michael stood out, not by asserting his presence, by drawing out the presence of others. He asked the questions that mattered, the ones that would unlock the stories within all of us. And then he'd share his own, always tying them back to something personal. He did something that made you feel seen, understood. It was this gift of connection that made him beloved in places like this, far from home, in corners of the world where his name became synonymous with warmth, with trust, with friendship. Latin America is where I had the privilege to follow in his footsteps. And man, no need for social media. No reliance on the digital threads that bind us here today. He carried with him a leather-bound agenda, a day timer, filled with the names and dates and details of folks from all over the world that only someone who truly cared would remember. He was in many ways a keeper of memories, yours and mine, and those of countless others who had the good fortune to cross his path. In many of our circles, he was known as Miguelito Merengue because he genuinely had a passion for Latin America. He wasn't Latino. Michael knew many of the conversations that many of us hear about Latin America still today in 2025. There's no money in Latin America. Why go there? Also, are they really prepared for our level of education? But he never listened to the noise. Instead, he traveled there. Not just once, not just occasionally. He went consistently. And he brought others with him. When I first started, I was following in his footsteps, but I wasn't just following because I was expanding his vision, reaching deeper into Latin America, just like he wanted, just like he thought it should be. Michael's leadership was quiet, steady, humble. He was never about the spotlight. He was about the work. In Puerto Rico, Panama, Mexico, Michael was a rock star. He quietly built the coalitions that didn't have a name. He got to meet people from all over, and I know some of you in the audience know him. And he also advised so many of us, like myself, Juan Camilo, who maybe many of you know also and have been traveling with him. Michael put admissions, practices aside to fight for people, individual students. He didn't advocate for policy. He didn't advocate for numbers. He advocated for people. Michael's leadership was quiet, relentless, and he led by example. Today, we are being called to lead by example, by action, in a world that is demanding fearless vision, unapologetic action, relentless pursuit of what is right. Because today, we cannot afford to wait for permission. We cannot afford to play it safe, to whisper when the moment demands that we speak. I want to introduce to all of you a few special guests and have a conversation with all of us.